I'm going to give you some reasons why you should not buy a full-size adventure bike. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you what you think a full-size adventure bike is. Before I started riding, I think a full-size adventure bike would have been something in the neighborhood of 800 cc's. Now I think it's kind of like anything over, I would consider anything over 1,000 cc to be a full-size adventure bike, but it's going to be whatever you think. Now, what's the first reason not to buy a full-size adventure bike? Well, depending on the full-size adventure bike that you're getting, they are really expensive, especially if you're buying new. The Chinese bikes, like CF Moto, are much more reasonably priced if you want to go that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. You could almost buy a touring bike and a dirt bike, or a dual sport, if you so wanted, for the same price as a full-size adventure bike. Now, again, look at the kind of full-size adventure bike are we talking about. Adventure bikes are something that can be used a little bit off-road and a little bit on-road. They could be anywhere, you know, from the Africa Twin, the BMW 1350 GS. Just look at the price of those, and depending on what you can afford. If I had all the money in the world, I would have a whole bunch of different bikes. The downside with being expensive as well is dropping the bike. My first motorcycle is a dual sport, and I bought it as a beginner bike to be my adventure bike. And I dropped that many times, whether that be off-road or in parking lots doing practice. So if you have that full-size adventure bike, that gets pretty expensive. If you're going to spend that kind of money and you're going to be using it as an adventure bike and dropping it. And depending on the bike, the parts could be very expensive to replace when you break those parts. So you want to keep the price in mind. If you have the unlimited funds, and then it's not a big deal. For me, it would be a big deal. The other thing about getting that full-size adventure bike is the weight. Usually a full-size adventure bike, something, you know, over 1,000 cc's, is going to be north of 500 pounds. And I'm sure that they're starting to make lighter weight ones, but 500 pounds, or let's say 500, 575 pounds, if you're going to be riding it off the road as a adventure bike and you drop it, that's going to be really hard to lift by yourself. There are some people who have no problem. You're going to have like really, you know, strong guys that can do it, and then you're going to have some, you know, other average guys like me that would be a bit of a struggle, and you've got to use the proper techniques. So you got to keep that in mind. And then that kind of goes back to the, you know, expensive part of it. You've got to plan to drop their bikes off-road. I dropped my first bike, that was my cheap adventure bike, many times off-road. The good news was, it was the KLR 650, and it was rather easy to pick up. It was only about 450 pounds if I had a full tank of gas, and any parts that I broke were really cheap. Really cheap to replace, so that was kind of nice. So keep that in mind, the weight. If you're going to be using it any more than for kind of like dirt roads, like for the kind of riding I do, that would be a consideration, because of course they advertise these full-size adventure bikes, and they'll have professional riders in these commercials, and they'll show them doing wheelies and jumps and things like that. Those are professional riders. Most people riding those, you know, buying those full-size ADV bikes can't ride like that. Another thing to consider is these bigger adventure bikes are going to have over 100 horsepower. Now, that can be very daunting off-road, especially for someone that's a bit newer, because you might not be able to control that power, and that can easily send you off the side of the road. A guy like me, I started off-road on a 40 horsepower KLR 650, so moving up to a larger adventure bike, it's still really difficult, but at least I kind of got my feet wet using something a little bit more manageable. So those are some reasons you should not get an adventure bike. But if you really want my advice, I suggest you get an adventure bike. I really enjoy it. You might too. Take care, ride safe, and thanks for watching.